listener production.
Hello, Sacha Barbour Gatt with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Do you remember this moment?
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
That was the moment many say Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 election against Donald Trump. Statements like that can make or break a candidate. And we've seen the internet blow up overnight when we learned Trump's running mate, JD Vance, once called current Vice President and presumptive Democratic nominee Kamala Harris a childless cat lady and claimed America was being run by them.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. If you look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
Harris has never had children, but she is a stepmother to two. Friends star Jennifer Aniston, who is childless, spoke out in support of Harris earlier today. On Instagram, she said, "I truly cannot believe this is coming from a potential VP. All I can say is, Mr. Vance, I pray that your daughter is fortunate enough to bear children of her own one day." So what does this mean for the election, and are there more zingers in the wings for JD Vance? Emma Shortis is a senior researcher at the Australia Institute. Her latest book is Our Exceptional Friend, Australia's Fatal Alliance with the United States. Emma, welcome to The Briefing. Let's put this chat into perspective quickly. So in 2021, JD Vance told Fox News host Tucker Carlson that the US was being run by a, quote, bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too, end quote. Why did he make that comment, and was there a reaction at the time like there is now?
So JD Vance is actually known for these kinds of comments, and that's because he has an ultra-conservative view of the role that women should play in society. So that covers issues like reproductive rights and gender roles and an insistence really that government has to regulate those roles. So it's entirely unsurprising that Vance was making these comments and that they were directed particularly against women who are seen to be on the left. So he mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in particular at that time. And I think he made those comments as well because resentment was particularly strong, of course, because Donald Trump had lost the election. So conservatives in America had thought they would have, another chance really to impose these kinds of social conservative laws and regulations on American lives. And they lost that chance when they lost the election. And so there was a particular amount of resentment there. And it's, again, not surprising that they've come up again now in light of Kamala Harris being the likely Democratic nominee. I think people will be going through all of Vance's old comments and pulling these out all of the time now.
And I wanted to talk to you about how the conversation and the mood or the sentiment, I guess, has shifted since since Joe Biden stepped down and Kamala became the presumptive nominee, in that before it was about two old white men, and now that there is a woman running for the presidency, am I right in saying that there has already been a shift in the rhetoric around, and particularly from conservatives, around the race?
There's been a dramatic shift in the whole framing of the race, I think, not just from conservatives, but particularly on the conservative side, there has been, Trump's almost kind of having a tantrum about the fact that he's going to have to face off against Harris. He's been complaining on a number of fronts and really leaning into this narrative that she is an illegitimate candidate. So they will often describe her as a DEI candidate, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's this idea that the only reason she's gotten any job, let alone, potentially the nomination, is because she's a woman and because she's a person of color. So it's this idea that, if you're not a white dude, you can't possibly have gotten to where you are through merit. And this is totally consistent with Trump. He rose to national prominence with making the same kind of argument against Barack Obama's presidency. The thing with Harris is, because she's also a woman, the attacks are potentially even more extreme, because they attack her not only as a black woman, but also as a woman, for example, who hasn't had children, and so doesn't fit that kind of expectation, that conservative expectation of the role that women are supposed to play. So you see these attacks on all fronts, which in, what we know is a pretty unstable political atmosphere is super, super dangerous.
Mm. I can't help but think of Hillary Clinton in 2016. It felt like she was a shoo-in. Everyone was expecting her to beat Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump was expecting her to beat him as well. And she didn't. He won. There's talk that part of the reason Hillary Clinton didn't win was because she's a woman. Has America come far enough in the last 8 years to elect a woman?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think the first thing I would say is that Hillary Clinton was the subject of the most appalling misogynistic attacks during that election campaign. But I don't think we can necessarily say that's why she didn't win. She came with an extraordinary amount of political baggage. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on in that election that explains that loss, part of which is that she's a woman, but I don't think that's the only kind of explanatory factor. Whether the US has come far enough, I think, is a really difficult question because, the US hasn't made progress on those fronts in terms of civil rights and women's rights in a steady way. There's always this sense, I think, of like the US moving forward and becoming a better place as time goes by. But that's not how it's happened. It's taken steps, really important steps forward and then, pretty significant steps backwards. So I don't think we can really say yet, whether a woman will be elected and a woman of colour in particular will be elected in the United States. It will come down to the decisions potentially of like a couple of thousand voters in states like Arizona or Michigan, and whether they are open to Harris and her campaign, I think really remains to be seen. But I will say the enthusiasm around Harris in the last couple of days has taken so many people, I think, by surprise. There's been this injection of energy into their campaign, extraordinary fundraising, extraordinary mobilization. Like it really has kind of Barack Obama 2008 vibes at the moment. And so, I think for supporters of Harris, that would be really energizing and I think real grounds for optimism. But, of course, there's a long way to go until November.
Yes, as we are only learning so much. It's been 2 weeks. It feels like it's been 2 years since, the crazy last fortnight kicked off, starting with Donald Trump and the assassination attempt. It's insane. Hey, look, I want to talk about the polls that were released overnight in the New York Times. They're neck and neck. What do you make of that?
Look, I think it's interesting that the polls are moving that quickly. I think Harris would always get a bounce just because of the kind of despair, really, that was infusing American politics around the choice between Biden and Trump. But I do think we should be skeptical at this stage. Like, I think, we're barely catching up with what's happened in the last couple of weeks of American politics. That assassination attempt feels like years ago, as he said, it was only a couple of weeks. And so I think we need to wait for the polls to catch up, for people to process that and imagine how it's going to affect their vote. But having said that, it is tightening in national votes. Harris is certainly catching Trump and looking a lot better than Biden was. But of course, what will matter, as we were just discussing, is those state-by-state races. So I think, it's best to kind of wait and see what those state polls are saying probably in a couple of weeks rather than kind of making assumptions on the ones we're getting now.
Do you think comments like what's emerged from JD Vance about childless cat ladies will have an impact on how people feel about either the Trump side or the Harris side?
I think they will. I think those kind of comments are directed particularly at the Trump base, at the, the kind of core base of Republican voters that are rusted on with Trump because, they love that kind of stuff. And particularly a total abortion ban is a generational project of that side of American politics. And so they will lean into those kind of comments and seek to mobilize voters based on them. And the Harris side, the Democrats, will do exactly the same. I think the contrast now between Harris, who has owned the issue of reproductive rights in the campaign and is really, really strong on it, compared to Trump and Vance, who are so strongly anti-abortion to the point where Vance is even opposed to IVF as well. Like, these are extreme positions that are not held by the majority of American people. And so that contrast is going to be pretty extraordinary, I think. And we know that reproductive rights in particular are really mobilizing for American voters. It was a critical issue in the 2022 midterms where everyone thought the Republicans were going to win Congress, they were going to win the House easily. And they didn't. And that was because people came out to vote motivated, many of them motivated by reproductive rights and a real backlash against the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and the constitutional right to abortion. Because 1 in 3 American women are now living in states with total or really strict abortion bans. So this is an issue that's affecting people and their lives really significantly. And I think will really frame the campaign. And again, that's where Harris, I think, has a really distinct advantage.
Let's say Harris does take up the nomination. It's all but certain that she will. How do you see the next 4 months unfolding? How do you predict it to play out, not only at the polls in November, but also the campaign leading up?
Look, again, it's a pretty risky thing to do to try and predict American politics. As we know, anything could happen. But I have been really, really struck, as I said, by the energy that Harris has injected into this race and the enthusiasm. You know, we can't underestimate the fact that Beyonce has given her rights to one of her songs that's featuring in her first campaign ad. You know, Beyonce is notoriously strict about who she lets have her rights to her music. And that kind of like pop culture and enthusiasm and the way it kind of invigorates young voters, and it will invigorate African-American voters who are critical to Democratic victories. You know, Harris is like 53 points ahead or something like that with African-American voters. So all of that indicates to me that Harris can do it. You know, if you'd asked me that question a couple of weeks ago, I would have said Trump's going to win for sure, like it's his to lose. But that calculation has really, really changed. It will still come down to those couple of swing states, but I think, you know, the campaign has shifted so much. You know, it was so negative. It was full of despair, I think, and apathy from the American people. And this has changed that dramatically. How that actually plays out, I think, is anybody's guess. But I think for Americans, it is pretty invigorating to feel like they now at least have a choice.
It's been, as we said, an absolutely crazy fortnight. There's still a few months to go. Emma, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your valuable insights.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That was Emma Shortis, Senior Researcher at the Australia Institute. You can check out her latest book, Our Exceptional Friend, Australia's Fatal Alliance with the United States. And that is all for this episode of The Briefing. But don't forget, the Weekend Briefing is back tomorrow with Antoinette Lattouf. She has a fascinating chat with Australian comedian, actor, composer, songwriter, pianist and director Tim Minchin. Here's a sneak peek.
I will give you another compliment, Matilda and the music. I listen to it on repeat in my household. Yes, I have 2 girls who love musicals.
You have an excuse.
I have an excuse,
Yeah.
but I listen to it in the car when they're not with me. And Revolting Children, I'm going to say, that's the best song on the. Do you call it a soundtrack? It's a soundtrack.
Yeah, on the movie soundtrack?
Yeah, the movie soundtrack.
Yeah, I agree.
You've previously written songs, Come Home, which is about Cardinal Pell, and I Still Call Australia Homophobic. What would your anthem now be for the country or the state of human rights in the world?
I wrote it.
Oh.
I wrote it and it just won the biggest advertising prize on the planet.
That'll be in your feed tomorrow. Don't forget as well, we put up full episodes of our Weekend Briefing chats on YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. It's been a massive week. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. We'll see you next time.